In this video, I would like to review key skills from quarter one by analyzing some interim questions. So before we are starting our reteach sessions, I would like to give you some quick ideas on some important skills that we need to address once more. The problem number one was to determine two or more central ideas in a text and analyze their development over the course of the text, and also to provide an objective summary of the text. What is a central idea? It's what the text is mostly about. By looking at the title, the subheadings, and the first and last sentences of each paragraph, you can normally find the central idea. They can also be always supported with details from the text. In question 7 from the interim, the test makers asked you to identify the central idea. The question was, which of the following is a central idea in an unlikely friendship? Looking at the 4 answer choices, you should have chosen answer D. Examining the past can help one understand those who lived in it. This is the central idea because it does not focus on one of the details the grandson finds out about his grandfather, but rather makes a general statement about the whole text. It was the grandson getting an assignment to find out more about his grandfather's past during the Second World War and his journey of traveling to Japan, learning about the Bataan Death March, about his forced labor and his experience as a POW, a prisoner of war. So all of these ideas are summarized with the last statement. Someone is examining the past. This is what the grandson does. And by doing that, he understands his grandfather much better. And thinking about this, and this is what I always tell you, sometimes you need to step back from that text and think about it. That is what you also wrote your essay about. The grandson learning something about his grandfather. So looking at A, B, and C, you see that these are important ideas from the text, but they are rather details supporting what he learned. He learned about the Bataan Death March. He learned about how his grandfather kept the 2 photographs as the only thing that he took on that ship. And C, of course, you learned about the forced labor and the POWs. But out of these 4 choices, D is the best one that summarizes the whole text. The other part of that standard is the objective summary. An objective summary is a short statement that gives the main ideas of a text. There's no bias and there are no opinions expressed. You focus on central ideas only, no details, and think about it as it's a generalization. It's a shorter version of the central ideas of the text. Question number 1 asked you to summarize. It went, which is the best summary of the passage from An Unlikely Friendship? Looking at all the answer choices. A. The narrator recalls his grandfather's war experiences as he looks for a boy who befriended his grandfather in Japan. Sounds very good to me. B. The narrator recalls his grandfather's experiences as a soldier and a POW in World War II to a high school class in Japan. Well, the high school class in Japan, that's one episode in the text. It's not everything. It's a minor detail, not a minor, but it's a detail in the text. So I would eliminate that answer. C. The narrator travels to Japan to stand in the location where his grandfather's picture was taken during World War II. Again, yes, that happened in the text, but it doesn't give an overall idea. It doesn't summarize everything that happened in the text. So I would eliminate this because standing there in that same spot was one idea only. And D, the narrator thinks about his grandfather's experiences in World War II while looking at photographs. Well, this doesn't even imply that he traveled, that he talked to the brother of his grandfather's friend, that he talked to high school students, all his research. So that could be eliminated as well. So my first guess, A, when I read it and said it was pretty good, that is the answer. He recalls his grandfather's war experiences. That is a generalization, and it includes all the details. The POW experience, the forced labor, the Bataan Death March, it's all included in there. And as he looks for a boy who befriended his grandfather in Japan, that was his main concern when he traveled to Japan. So that includes that as well. So A is the correct answer. It's the best summary of the passage. Problem number 2 is tied to the following standard. Cite several pieces of textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. Remember our video with Ms. Dalton and I being detectives looking for things we could find out about Mr. Gardner and Mr. Hamio. We were making educated guesses based on the evidence we saw. Question number 9 pointed to that standard. You had to make an inference. Why does the author most likely reveal his age in paragraph 7? Remember, he said that he was 27 at that time. A, to show that it has taken 27 years for him to understand the horrors of war. He never said that there were years when he didn't understand it. We don't have a chronology of him actually understanding or not understanding the horrors of war. So I don't think that his whole life, and that would mean the 27 years, that his whole life was dedicated to researching his grandfather's experiences and only after 27 years understanding it. And that's what the answer implies. So this is not a correct answer. B, to suggest that many of the POWs were similar in age. To me, that doesn't really make sense because he never mentions how old some of these POWs were. So that would be a far-fetched in my opinion. Let's see if there's a better answer. To emphasize that, see, the connection he feels with his grandfather in retracing his steps. I think that sounds pretty good because when you remember the text, it says that standing there he felt connected to his grandfather because he realized he was the same age now that his grandfather was when he was a prisoner of war. So that would emphasize the connection he feels. He is the same age as his grandfather was. He's there in freedom talking about it 60 years after it, while his grandfather was his same age but had a totally different experience at that time. So I like that answer. But look at D. To show it took 27 years for his grandfather to recover from his POW experiences. I don't think that's it because we never got any ideas of how many years it took his grandfather to get over it, and I don't think he ever got over it. That's why he kept those pictures, and that's why we know it must be more than 27 years. Remember, his grandfather was maybe in his 70s and he was there when he was 27, so it probably took him more than 50 years to get over it, if at all he got over it. So for this question, it should be C, to emphasize the connection he feels with his grandfather in retracing his steps. Last thing I want to talk about is test-taking strategy. There are two things I want to talk about. I want you to always analyze the question carefully, and you can do that by crossing out unnecessary words to get to the core of the question and then apply logic. Let's look at one test question, number 3. It says, based on information in an unlikely friendship, how did many POWs spend their time while in Japanese custody during World War II? Now, this is a very long question. I want to get to the core of it. The first part, based on information in an unlikely friendship. I can cross that out. It just says refer to the text. Of course, I know that. How did many POWs spend their time while in Japanese custody during World War II. So I would underline how POWs spend time in custody. Cross out all the other words. Focus on that. How did they spend their time during being in custody, when in custody? And now apply your logic. Were the prisoners sharing their stories and photographs with each other? They were not. They had a hard time. You wrote about that in your essays, how they didn't have enough food, how hard a physical labor they had to do there. So no, A is totally wrong. That's what they did after the war, not during Japanese custody. B, dropping food barrels to those in need. No, remember, his grandfather lost so much weight he could barely stand. They didn't have food to drop. C, working in Japanese companies and factories. Here we go. That's what they did. Apply your logic. That's what you learned about the grandfather. He was forced to work in that factory. And D, working aboard hospital ships. No, he was not working on a hospital ship, but the hospital ship is mentioned in the text because later the hospital ship got those prisoners out of Japan, bringing them back to America at the end of the war. So it's C. They were working very hard, and all of you understood that and wrote really nice essays about that. I hope this quick review of important concepts and skills from quarter one helped you to understand summarizing, finding the central idea, test taking, and making inferences a little bit better. And we will start reteaching some of those concepts tomorrow, but also continuously throughout quarter two. We will have practices and will apply those important skills over and over again, so that when the quarter two interim comes around, which will not be that far away, only about 6 weeks, then you will be able to collect a few more points.